A class of essential workers who don't get as much attention is sanitation workers. They collect the trash of all of those who've been quarantining at home, oftentimes without proper personal protective gear or paid sick leave.
Sanitation workers in New Orleans started striking 2 weeks ago. They were demanding hazard pay and a living wage of $15 an hour. The city, as we covered here, tried to hire prisoners to do that work instead, but that program ended when its sponsor learned about the striking workers. In front of the show, and former Sanders National Campaign co-chair Nina Turner has been following this unbelievable story, and she joins us now via Skype. Always great to see you, Nina.
Good morning.
Morning, Nina.
So just bring people up to date with what is happening here, what triggered this strike, and what is the latest?
It's called a wildcat strike, where the workers, who are really these workers in Louisiana and NOLA, are really hired through a private contractor. But wildcat strike, meaning it wasn't organized through a union, but just decided because of the work conditions that they could no longer take it. I mean, these essential workers, and majority of them are African-American men, are putting their lives in danger every single day to protect the health and safety. We know that even in good times, not having garbage pickup can lead to other dangers, rodents, other diseases. So this is an essential service, whether we're dealing with COVID-19 or just regular everyday life. They don't have PPEs. They're not even making $15 an hour. That is not a lot to ask. And they want hazard pay. So they've been out there trying to draw attention to this. And as you mentioned, bringing in prisoners to clean up the city and to disposition the striking workers is just really unconscionable. And by the way, the lives of those prisoners should matter as well. And so they're continuing to fight for better pay, for hazard pay, for $15 an hour minimum wage, and for protection. This reminds me a little bit, albeit not exactly similar, but if we think about what happened in February of 1968, where Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the Memphis striking sanitation workers, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Their lives in 1968 were not valued, and the lives of the 21st century sanitation workers and other essential workers are not being valued either.
And Nina, what do we know about broader movements across the country for things like this? Are there other groups and workers that are standing up across the country? What does your knowledge tell you there?
Yeah, I mean, McDonald's workers went on strike as well. They decided to go on strike because there was going to be an annual shareholders meeting. I believe they did that across 20 cities, striking for the same reasons. They need protection and they need better pay. And again, we shouldn't even have to have this kind of conversation to say to shareholders, to say to people who own these corporations, that if you do right by your workers, that is good for the business bottom line. But
Right.
We see workers standing up all over this country, although they can't necessarily do it in the same ways that we did it before COVID-19. They are still using the technology and action-oriented processes to get the word out. Workers must unite. And we, those of us who depend on these workers, whether it's food service, whether it's sanitation workers, whether it's our workers in the medical industry, we need to be there to support their efforts to work in safe conditions, to get the raises that they deserve, to get their hazard pay. Without them, I mean, COVID-19 alone is bad enough, but without the essential workers, we would really be in a bad way, and that's putting it mildly. So essential workers need essentially what they need to be able to do their jobs and to keep us safe and healthy.
Well, and you're right to point out, I'm so glad you did, that this isn't the first time that sanitation workers have been on the front line of fighting for economic and racial justice. Of course, with Dr. King, there was also a major strike in New York City of sanitation workers where ultimately, because as you and Sagar are both pointing out, like if the trash starts to pile up, things start to get really ugly really quickly. They ultimately were able to win massive concessions and, really decent pay and benefits and all of those things. And so one of the things that's maybe a source of power during this time is that for the first time in a while, people actually are more aware of the fact that these workers are essential. They're not just essential in COVID. They're essential every single day. They're doing the work that literally allows this society to run and stay on the rails. And so in a certain sense, they have a lot of power because we really need them. We really rely on them, and it's never been more apparent.
That's right. And we've taken it for granted. So even though the pressures of COVID-19 absolutely a lot of pain. There's death. There's loss of livelihood, even if you don't physically die, losing your loved ones. Some people being very lonely, especially our elders. We know that the unemployment rate right now, is going up. It'll be well over 40 million people and climbing. And to look back to see that this virus is really piercing what I hope our consciousness, to remind us that the people and the very professions that we take for granted every single day, especially in the United States of America, is just par for the course. We just absolutely become accustomed. The garbage will be picked up on a regular basis. People will make it to the stores. We can shop all day, shop all night. Now we are realizing that any little ripple in what is apparently normal can cause catastrophe, can cause chaos, and just how much all of these workers across the spectrum are absolutely needed. And I hope we never go back to normal. I hope even beyond COVID-19 that we continue to lift up and be in solidarity and allyship, co-conspirators with all of our essential workers.
Do you see the bubblings of the type of, nationwide worker solidarity and movements? Because we're seeing these things bubbling up in New Orleans. I mean, we've covered a number of them here in New Orleans, in Georgia, in New York, across the country with McDonald's now. Do you see this as the bubblings of something larger, or do you think that this will ultimately sort of fizzle out as we move on from the pandemic?
I hope not, Crystal. I mean, the pain of staying the same. We can't go back. And so it is my sincere hope that not only will the progressive movement take up this mantle, but the progressive movement and our unions and other conscious-minded organizations will come together and continue to fight, because we can't stop. We have to continue to build from this. So no, we cannot go back to being the same. Absolutely cannot go back to being the same.
Well, we agree with you there, Nina. Thank you so much for joining us.
Always great to see you, Nina. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Next on Rising, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal. She explains her plan to get millions of Americans back on the payroll when Rising continues.